This is Satan's Trilogy, Book 1, Chapter 2. While walking outside and around the corner to the parking lot, Brandy announced, "I'm afraid that I don't have a very nice car, but it runs most of the time." Employees park at the far end of the lot. After a short walk, Brandy stopped in front of a very old car, a red Ford Mustang with some rust showing on the side panels. The paint was terribly faded, the wheels were rusting, and there was a crack running up the front window, which Brandy had put off having replaced for several years. Brandy seemed to be a bit embarrassed about her car. "Your dad bought this car in 1987. It was 5 years old, but in very good condition. He put his life savings down to buy this car and never regretted it. He loved this car and enjoyed cruising in it every weekend. Sometimes he would just sit in the car with the radio on and relax. I was surprised that when he decided to go into the military, he gave the car to me. He told me I needed a dependable car. This car really has been great, and now I just don't want to part with it, even if I could afford a newer one." Brandy stood by the car as she told its history and felt the hood with her fingertips as she reminisced. It was as if she was making a connection to the past. Looking across the hood of the car, Esther could see love and sincerity her aunt was expressing for her brother's car. It was obvious in every move she made. Brandy was standing by the car gazing at the hood, slightly lost in a memory from the past. Esther decided to break the silence and to say something. "Dad and I never had a nice car. It didn't seem that important. When you move about as much as we did, a car is an anchor. Years ago, he did mention to me that he had fallen in love with a red Mustang as a young boy, and had managed to buy that car years later. He told me that the only thing he loved more than that car was you, which is why he gave it to you when he left." Esther placed her fingertips onto the hood of the car the same way Brandy had, and felt the connection the car had with her father. Without looking at Brandy and gazing at the car, Esther commented, "I'm really glad to see you still have this car." Esther then continued, "Dad had a lot of friends, and we were always with someone that had either a car or a military vehicle of some type. We traveled a lot in military vehicles. They were really terrible rides." Esther giggled. "I mean, you felt every bump on the road. Once I was 6 years old, I got motion sickness from rocking of the truck we were riding in. I had to lean out of the back and throw up. I was very embarrassed about that." Esther drifted off for a moment, but quickly recovered, smiled, and said, "Let's eat." Brandy laughed, got into the car, and reached over to unlock Esther's door. The door required a strong pull to open. Watching the effort that it took to open the door, Brandy felt compelled to explain its condition. "The wind caught the passenger door and blew it open a few years ago, and the door hasn't worked properly since. They told me it would cost several $100s to fix it. It didn't seem worth spending that much money considering it was the passenger door, and I seldom used it." Brandy looked at Esther, then laughed. "I guess we'll need to reconsider that position." Turning the key, the car started immediately, although it did throw out some dark exhaust for a few seconds. Brandy lived about 2 miles away, a rented condominium in a safe but poor neighborhood. Brandy was heading for Chinatown, the opposite direction. First, she had to find Canal Street, then follow it to 18th Street and go east. Brandy usually was the passenger when going out to eat and didn't worry about the street names to get there. I've been thinking about buying one of those GPS street guides, but they're a bit expensive for as seldom as I might use one. Brandy looked at Esther and smiled. I'm certain I can find this restaurant. It's at the start of Chinatown. I pass it every time I go out for Chinese with someone. Do I seem to be rambling a bit? Brandy asked. No, not at all, Aunt Brandy. I enjoy hearing about your life and the things that you do, replied Esther in a serious tone. I'm afraid that as hungry as I am, the traveling has really tired me. Esther then gave a big yawn and excused herself. After we eat, I may have to get some sleep. Esther didn't seem to mind the loud noises or the heavy traffic. She was taking in the sights while being a passenger and still looking at Brandy when necessary. Tell me, Esther, what do you think so far of our city? Asked Brandy. Dad and I lived in a lot of cities and traveled a lot of countries. Esther turned her head to look at her aunt. Some of them were very heavily populated. The streets were often half the width of this one, if not less. Turning her head again, this time to look straight ahead, Esther went on with her comments. While some cities look old and some looked even older, the people were always wonderful. Esther looked at her aunt and said, We met dozens of people everywhere we went. Esther then laughed, perhaps a memory that she wasn't ready to share at the moment. Esther's stomach made a growling sound. Slightly embarrassed by the sound of her stomach, Esther excused herself and then continued, Food is a very common denominator. We all enjoy eating with family and friends. Esther stopped talking as Brandy pulled into a parking lot. The restaurant had a large neon sign outside which read, Chinese Restaurant, Sha Tin Cuisine. And Brandy, is this the restaurant we are going to? Esther asked with some amazement. With a lot of confidence, Brandy said, Best Chinese restaurant in the city, and I've been to a lot of them. Brandy was out of her door and walking around the front of the car before Esther could make an additional comment. Esther sat for a second, then pushed her door open. Esther made a big smile on her face. Looking at her aunt, Esther explained, Dad and I lived in the Sha Tin district in Hong Kong. It has such a beautiful countryside. As a child, I learned to speak Chinese in this region. You might think this odd, but I often find myself thinking in Chinese and not English. As a child, Dad wanted me to speak both languages, but everyone around me spoke Chinese, and only a few knew English. For years, my speech favored Chinese and not English. Showing a big smile, Esther added, I had some of the most enjoyable years of my life while living in China. I should tell you, I learned a lot about cooking too. And that's it.